Hello and welcome back to the channel. So for today, I was thinking since last time we did a Kineticist versus spellcaster comparison, it might be interesting to do a Kineticist versus martial character. Paizo at least seems to consider the Kineticist more of a martial class, even though many of their feats look like spells, as we can see in the fact that they get feats at first level, which is something in the martial domain and not so much the spellcaster domain. So the way we're going to do this is going to be through a damage comparison. And disclaimer out of the way first, obviously damage comparison is not the be-all end-all of class comparison. Not only are there a lot more facets to the game than just pure damage that are often impossible to calculate, but also, more importantly, I think, is you're going to be in a party. And the context of your party is going to change significantly how valuable certain things are. So, with that being said, I'm going to lay out a few ground rules as assumptions that I am making in order to make this damage comparison possible. The first of it is that we are only going to calculate damage for one round, and that all three actions of that round are going to be used for often offensive actions. I am going to disallow most setup, for example, having a friend cast haste on you to help with your damage, but I will allow certain class-specific things that you're going to want to do immediately in every combat. For example, Kineticists will be allowed to channel their Kineticate and have that assumed to be available to them during our calculation round. I am going to be counting damage against individual targets. So most of the times this means against a single target, but for AoE abilities specifically, I will assume that you can hit exactly 2 enemies with them. This is obviously going to benefit the Kineticist much more than other martials, since the Kineticist has more AoE abilities. I feel that it's fair to assume that a 30-foot cone is probably going to hit around 2 enemies on average. As for our enemies, I will be assuming that everyone we attack is going to be using the moderate AC and saves for an unlevel creature, as described in the building creature rules. So, for example, as you can see here, at level 1, a moderate enemy is going to have a 15 AC, as well as a +7 to all of their saves. And because our enemies are going to be fairly generic, I am going to assume that only generic damage is being counted. For example, some abilities may deal positive damage, and while that is certainly useful in normal campaign, I'm not going to count it here since it only works against creatures with negative healing. In addition, when I calculate the 2 hit chances, I'm generally going to ignore the effects of a natural 20 or a natural 1. Because of the way the PF2 system works, and because we are facing modern AC and saves, if something is rolling a natural 20, it's almost always going to crit already, and if something is rolling a natural 1, it's almost always going to crit fail already. So I am discounting the effects of those in rules just to keep the calculations a little bit simpler. And finally, for the builds that you're taking, I am just going to get very basic bare bones builds at levels 1, 5, 10, and 20. And I am going to try and focus on ranged martials, since the Kineticist for the most part is a ranged class. So with all those caveats out of the way, let's take a look at the basic builds that I'm going to be using for comparison, starting with be a kineticist, who at level 1 is just going to be a basic kineticist, and is obviously going to have 18 con because it's their key ability score. However, they also will be having 16 strength and level 1 for reasons I'll get to in a second. For their element, they will be choosing single gate fire, which grants them a d6 elemental blast, and also the impulse junction to increase the damage die of all fire damage they deal by one step. As for feats, we're going to take Flying Flame, which is a small controllable bird that we can fly in 30 feet and damages any enemy it passes through, which I am going to count as an AoE ability, so we're going to assume it damages 2 creatures. As well as Weapon Infusion, which allows us to give a weapon property to our Elemental Blast. The relevant one for us is the second ranged option, where we get a range increment of 50 feet as well as the propulsive trait, allowing us to add half of our strength modifier rounded down to our damage, which is why we want a 16 strength to begin with. So for our damage calculation, we will be using our first action in our turn to just fire an elemental blast with a propulsive trait, and then the other 2 actions using a flying flame to deal damage to 2 enemies, as well as using our impulse junction to increase the damage die of flying flame by 1 step from 1d6 to d8. So calculating that out, based on our assumptions, our level 1 kineticist will deal 10.125 damage on average in 1 round. And if you want to check my math, because I am sure I've done something wrong in it, messed something up, I will link a Google spreadsheet in the description that will show the process I took and the math I did in order to try and come up with these numbers. So next up in our damage comparison, at level 5, our kineticist levels up a little bit and gets to pick up the Blazing Wave feat, which for 2 action deals 4d6 fire damage to everyone in a 30-foot cone versus a basic reflex save. Additionally, at level 5, we also get our Gates Threshold, which allows us to expand the path on our fire element, letting us pick an impulse junction, which for fire will be the aura junction. Enemies that are kinetic aura gain weakness fire from our fire impulses equal to half our level. This will apply to both any impulse feats we cast, as well as our basic elemental blast, which does count as an impulse. Now, I am still going to assume that 2 enemies are getting caught in an aura junction, and both of those will be able to be hit by our AoE abilities. And well, you might say that's difficult to do when your aura is only 10 feet wide. At level 10, we do get the aura shaping ability, which allows us to increase our aura to a 20-foot emanation, and eventually at 20th level to a 30-foot emanation, which makes the assumption I'm making a little more feasible. And finally, we also get the Kineticist version of our fundamental rune, the Gate Attenuator, which grants us +1 on our impulse attack rolls, but not to our impulse DCs. And when we calculate all of this out, we get an average damage at level 5 of 35.7 damage. At level 10, nothing much changes for us given the stipulation set out at the start. Really, all that happens is we get a 20 con and our Blazing Wave gets to scale. I, with a quick scan of the face, didn't find anything that dealt more raw damage than Blazing Wave did, given our assumptions. While there are certainly other feats that would be worth taking depending on what you want in your situation, and many feats that provide control or some other benefit other than just damage. However, for our purposes, readers want a blazing wave which now deals 7d6 fire damage or 7d8 with their impulse junction, leading us to deal a total of 63.775 damage on average during our attack round. And finally, at level 20, we get, of course, 22 con from our stat boost, plus an additional 2 for a total of 24 from our Apex item, as well as the class feature Final Gate, allowing us to channel elements as a free action at the start of the turn. And this will come with the free elemental blast that channel elements does, so for our purposes, it's an extra attack we get to do. Additionally, we can pick up the feat Kinetic Pinnacle, which makes us quickened, and use the extra action to make an elemental last, allowing us even more damage on this final calculation. And finally, once again, in terms of pure raw damage, using the assumptions that we have set out, still nothing beats Blazing Wave, which now deals a total of 12d6 fire damage. So, calculating that all out, at level 20 during our damage round, we deal on average 150.825 damage. So, moving on to the marshals that we're going to be comparing to, there are 3 in total I want to look at. And the first is going to be the fighter, which is the obvious pinnacle of martial prowess. So, as mentioned, this is going to be a focus on ranged attackers, since the Kineticist is itself a ranged attacker. And that means, as a fighter, we're going to be starting with 18 dex as our key ability score, plus 16 strength, so that we can use propulsive short bows as our weapon. And the reason we want to use short bows instead of long bows is because of point blank shot, which grants us a +2 circumstance bonus on damage rolls against attacks within the target's weapon's first range increment, as long as our weapon does not have the volley trait, which the longbow does, but the shortbow does not. So, with these stipulations in mind, at level 1, a fighter using all 3 of their actions to attack 3 times the shortbow at point blank shot is going to deal 13.625 damage on average, slightly ahead of the Kineticist's 10.125. Next up at level 5, as per the Kineticist, we're going to be increasing our ability scores as normal, so 19 dex and 18 strength. We also pick up the double shot feat, which allows us for 2 actions to fire twice at -2 instead of once at -0 and once at -5, as per the normal multiple attack penalty. Additionally, our weapon now gets to be a +1 striking composite shortbow instead of the normal shortbow we started with. Now, normally there are a couple property moves that we can fit onto our shortbow at level 5, but none of them which deal generic damage. There is one that deals positive damage, but as I laid out in our assumptions, we will be ignoring positive damage and other damage types that require conditions to be met for the purposes of our calculations. So with all of that said, using double shot first for our 2 actions, and then taking a third shot at -10, the fighter will deal 23.1 damage on average. At level 10, our fighter further improves, getting 20 dex as well as the triple shot feat, which allows us to use all 3 of our actions to attack with all 3 at -4, a multiple attack penalty. And additionally, we will also get our weapon specialization, which, because we are now masters in short bows, will deal an extra 3 damage per attack. Our short bow is now also a +2 striking flaming frost composite short bow, which will deal an extra 2d6 damage per shot from our runes. All that being calculated, at level 10, using our 3 actions to triple shot, we deal 37.8 damage on average. And finally, at level 20, Our ability score increases, and Apex item brings us to a total of 24 dexterity, and we get to pick up the multi-shot stance, allowing us to use triple shot at -2 instead of -4, as well as the level 20 feet weapon supremacy, which makes us permanently quickened, but we can only use the action to strike, which for us is totally okay. Additionally, we get greater weapon specialization, which because we're now legendary in the bows, grants us a +8 to damage. And our weapon switches out to a +3 major striking, flaming frost thundering composite longbow. And the reason why we want longbow now instead of shortbow is that the number of damage dice have increased, such that the average damage from going from d6s on the shortbow to d8s on the longbow actually outweighs the +2 that we got from point blank shot. So, with all of this in mind, we calculate our average damage at level 20 at 96.725 if we use all 4 of our actions to strike. The second martial I want to compare it to is the Ranger, specifically because of their 300 edge, which allows them to economically spend all 3 of their actions attacking. This will be with a bow, so we don't get agile trait, so our multiple attack penalty will be -3, -6, but that's still much better than the normal -5, -10. So, as normal, we could be starting with 18 dex, 16th strength, and a composite longbow, since rangers don't have access to point-blank shot. Additionally, for our ranger feats at level 1, we get gravity weapon, which grants us a status bonus to damage on our first weapon strike. And if we choose human natural ambition, we can also pick up hunted shot, which allows us for one action to shoot twice with a ranged weapon at our hunted prey. And just like I let Kineticists channel elements before our damage round, I will also allow rangers to hunt the prey before their damage round. So, the total combination 18 dex, gravity weapon, hunted shot, hunt prey gives us an effective 4 attacks in level 1. And if we calculate that all out, the ranger will deal an average of 14.425 damage per round. At level 5, rangers don't get much, so we're just going to be boosting our strength to 18 and our dex to 19, as well as upgrading our longbow to a +1 striking composite longbow. And this means we deal an average damage of 19.275. At level 10, once again, not much changes. We get our 20 dex as well as weapon specialization, which grants us +2 damage because right now we're an expert in bows. And upgrading our weapon to a +2 striking flaming frost composite longbow, we deal on average 44.425 damage. And finally, in level 20, we get that 24 dex from ability score boost and our Apex item, greater weapon specialization, which grants us +6 damage because we're master in bows, as well as our masterful hunter upgrade, which upgrades our multiple attack penalty from -3, -6 to -2, -4. Weapon will be basically the same as the fighter's is going to be, the +3 major striking composite longbow, but we're only going to be having 2 damage rolls instead of the fighter's 3, because instead of a third damage rune, we get to have the speed rune, which grants us quickened to attack with the weapon, which was redundant for the fighter since they already had that through their weapon supremacy feat. So, with all that taken into account, at level 20, our ranger is dealing 89.875 damage on average. So, this is where I would like to take a pause and just discuss the numbers so far. I will be showing the spreadsheet at the end real quick, but I want to save it for now since there's going to be a little spoiler before the next class I want to discuss. But according to the damage numbers, especially at level 20, the Kineticists is dealing 150 damage per round, whereas the fighter and the ranger are both hovering around 90, which really surprised me. I was expecting the damage to be at least somewhat comparable. I wasn't sure if perhaps the Kinesis had the edge or the more standard martials had the edge, but I certainly wasn't expecting it for the Kinesis to deal almost 60% more damage than the fighter and the ranger. Now, of course, this is where we go back to the caveats that I set out, and especially the assumptions I was making. And I would like to draw attention to my assumption that AoE abilities are going to be hitting two targets. What this means is that since a lot of the Kinesis damage output was coming from those AoE abilities, from Blazing Wave specifically, that its damage is kind of artificially doubled. If you assume it only deals damage to one target, even using its AoE abilities, the damage drops substantially to around 100 damage per round, which is much more in line to what the fighters and the rangers were having. So before we move on to the final comparison, I just want us all to keep that in mind, that even though on paper it may look like the Kinesis dominates the other two martials, in practice that may not necessarily be the case. But the final class I want to compare to is the sort of king of pure damage, which is of course the barbarian. This one is going to be a melee build since that's obviously what the barbarian is best at, so we don't have to worry about dex at all and just start with our 18 strength. As for instinct, we're obviously going to be going with Titan Mauler, which upgrades our rage damage from normally being a +2 to any damage rolls to a enormous +6 to a damage roll. And pairing this with a crit axe that we get at level 1, we come out to an average of 20.625 damage from the barbarian, which is almost double what the Kineticist had at level 1. Moving on to our level 5 comparison, we of course get our weapon upgrade to a +1 striking great axe, but we also pick up the swipe feat, which is why I wanted to go specifically with the great axe instead of the great sword, for example. And that is because for 2 actions, we get to attack 2 targets at multiple attack ability of 0, and if our weapon has the sweep trait, which our great axe does, we apply it to both of our attacks, which means we get a +1 circumstance bonus to both of them. And because we are assuming AoE abilities get to deal damage to 2 creatures, Swipe has an AoE ability. The technical sense of the term is I am going to assume damage to characters. What this means is at level 5, the barbarian damage against 2 characters using Swipe and then a third action to attack comes out to 15.6 damage in a round. At level 10, we get our 20 strength, weapon specialization, which deals +2 damage because of our expert weapon efficiency, and because we're a giant barbarian, our giant specialization, which increases our rage damage from +6 to +10. Additionally, we can pick up the follow-up assault feat, which, if our previous action was a melee strike that missed, so for our purposes, if we missed our swipe, we get to follow up assault, making an attack with backswing and forceful, which is an extra +1 to our attack roll and a plus damage based on the number of damage dice we have. And that, along with our +2 striking flaming frost great axe that we have at level 10, grants us an average damage of 73.0775. And finally, at level 20, we get our 24 strength, our greater weapon specialization for +6 to damage, as well as greater giant inch-based specialization ability, which means our rage now increases our damage per attack to 18. Additionally, we get to pick up reckless abandon at level 16, which gives us a +2 circumstance for attack rolls so long as we are below our half hit points, as well as brutal critical, which adds an extra damage die onto our critical hits. Now there is a little bit of setup assumption with reckless abandon that you do start your turn below half health, but seeing as that reckless abandon itself is a free action, and as a barbarian you're probably going to be taking a lot of hits anyways, I feel it's a fine assumption to be making. So with that and our +3 major striking great axe with 2 damage runes and our speed rune the same as our ranger, the barbarian now deals with a swipe and 2 follow-up assaults 150.7 damage on average in a round. And this just goes to illustrate just how important it is that the assumptions I made at the beginning hold. Because this is almost identical to the Kineticists average damage of 150.825, a difference of only 1/8 point of damage over the round. So as promised, here is just a quick look at the spreadsheet of the total damage that I calculated in a round at levels 1, 5, 10, and 20 for each of our 4 classes. And you can see that actually overall the Kineticist does fairly comparable, especially when you're taking into account that the Kineticist is often damaging 2 targets because of the assumptions I'm making. And as I alluded to earlier, that really is such a powerful assumption in the Kineticist's favor. Because as you see, when we make the same assumption for the barbarian actually matches the Kineticist damage numbers. Whereas the fighter and the ranger, which are both the single target damage machines, are falling behind. And if you look at the spreadsheet purely, you might come away with the assumption that Crosses and barbarians are the best and fighters and rangers are worthless. And I really want to dissuade you of that notion because it just simply isn't true. Not only is it not always going to be, and even not often going to be a good idea, to spend all 3 of your actions attacking, the assumption that you're always going to be fighting precisely 2 enemies that you can both hit with all of your abilities at once and that they're always going to take average damage is just kind of ludicrous. And a fighter and a ranger can contribute quite a bit to the team with that third action, which maybe doesn't add that much to their total damage per round, by doing things like tripping or grappling, or intimidating opponents with demoralize, or any sort of other abilities that the Kineticists would have a much harder time doing, since their action economy is so much more stringent, with the requirement to be channeling elements constantly if they were using their impulse overflow feats. So that's all for this week's video. As I said, I'm going to link the Kineticists vs. Marshall spreadsheet that I just showed in the description of this video. I would like to say that while certainly the damage numbers aren't very useful or practical for drawing conclusions from, it was kind of a fun exercise just to see how the Kineticists matched up in terms of damage numbers versus other martial characters, and I must say they did surprise me in the amount of damage they could theoretically output in the calculations I was making. But that's all for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you come back next time to see what I have cooking up. But most importantly, I hope you have a lovely day.